Hey, welcome back. I'm Terry Burns, and this is a continuation of my class on the Monas Hieroglyphica or Hieroglyphic Monad of Dr. John D. Congratulations, you've made it to Theorem 15. That means that what you are on now is what I would call the long road home. That is, D is finally working towards his conclusion of all of these things he set up in the first 14 theorems, with Theorem 14 itself serving as a kind of interlude. You're right in the middle of the class if you just joined in. I'd love to have you in the class, but you might want to watch the earlier playlist first. That's below. This isn't really the best place to jump in, though you can try if you want to. I'm assuming you know D, you know what the hieroglyphic monad is, and you have understood the first 14 theorems. These theorems are where he has first built up the universe, whether it's the Garden of Eden or Plato's world of being or the Sefer Yetzirah, and then there has been a lightning flash of creation, let there be light, and then the tree or has fallen, or humanity has been kicked out of Eden, or he shifts back and forth between these all the time. And now what he is doing is building his way back to the restoration of the great tree, which is at this point the central context that he is using. Tadi has a Christian Kabbalist, not a Hebrew Kabbalist, not a rabbinic Kabbalist. This is an act of revelation, so we won't be surprised that he is not referring to Genesis so much anymore. In fact, by the time we get a couple more theorems down the road, he's going to be referring to the book of Revelation. Right now, though, he is using physical alchemy as a metaphor for spiritual alchemy of working back up the middle pillar of the tree. This is what Theorem 15 looks like. It's a long theorem. It's a delightful theorem. And to me, it's kind of a funny theorem. I know I'm easily entertained, but since it's so long, all I'm going to do is talk about this first paragraph. It's a very complicated paragraph. So let's take a look at it. I'll read it through first and then talk about how D is doing this thing where you think he's talking about one thing and really it's something else. Okay, he says, accordingly, we then suggest that philosophers note certain considerations regarding the labors of the sun and the moon around the earth. How, while whirling through Aries, the splendor of the sun is exalted. Then in the next sign, Taurus, obviously, a new light's essential dignification is strengthened. How the ancient ones explained this proximity of the luminaries, another noteworthy bit of magic, was through a mystical character with the distinguished name of Taurus. This is very well known, in fact, to be the exaltation of the moon, revealed among astronomical teachings all the way from the first age of humanity. But only those of whom it has come to pass are indeed high priests of the mysteries comprehend this particular mystery. And so, for similar reasoning, they have said Taurus is in the house of Venus, indisputably the house of virtuous and prolific conjugal love. As the great Ostanes concealed in his most secret and recondite mysteries, nature rejoices in nature. Okay, so what is going on here? First of all, the things in bold aren't in bold in D's original or in the translation Dr. Turner and I did. I've just put them in bold because I want to emphasize them here. When you read this first sentence, it sounds like labors of the sun and the moon around Earth. Oh, but wait, the sun doesn't go around Earth. Oh, he's being geocentric. He doesn't know better. There are even some excellent scholars who have belabored, all puns intended, that point all through scholarly papers and thus shown that they don't understand the hieroglyphic monad at all. That's not what he's talking about. So remember, everything he's doing is taking apart and putting together this monad glyph. We know that the center part that was a standalone Pythagorean monad, circle with a dot, is D's symbol for the sun, S-O-N, the sun, S-U-N, Tifereth, the sun in the sky, and above it is the moon. But we have flipped the monad in Theorem 10, and we have attributions for each of these things in the world as it is forming, right? So if you follow my cursor, this upside down point is reaching up to the three supernals, remember. Underneath that are the next two Sephiroth. Here is Tifereth, or if you prefer, you can call it the microprosopus or Zaire Enpin. You have actually then it connecting down here to the moon, which is the bottom part of the Zaire Enpin. And then the Earth, when it forms, you flip back over to this one. And then this bottom part that was in the flip monad reaching up to the supernals is now the symbol of Aries, firing you back up the middle pillar, using the metaphor of physical alchemy for spiritual alchemy. So the labors of the sun and the moon around the earth are the light of Tifereth, that emanation of God, which is sometimes called a sphere. And if we shift back to the Timaeus, the perfect form is a sphere, and they're always spinning. So that is Tifereth, and here you are down in Malkuth. All right, that's the way you're looking at this. You have taken apart the monad, you flipped it around, and you can follow by his references in further theorems what he's talking about. The labors of the sun and the moon around Earth. How while whirling through Aries. Oh, Aries. But that sign that we use for Aries now is not what he's using. He's using two perfect semicircles, and it's the fire at the bottom here, Aries being a fire sign. And let's see, the splendor of the sun is exalted. And then in the next sign, Taurus. Well, you can see from that symbol of Taurus, which he also draws out in that theorem, how easily that fits over his little circle with the dot, and the horns of Taurus match the horns at the top of the monad glyph. So once we've got that straight, now we can understand what he's doing in the opening part of this, because it's really ingenious. So I've talked about sun always means sons, but then labors are alluding to the 12 labors of Hercules or Heracles. There's a whole thing in the Renaissance of Dee's time and just before and just after of rulers being associated with the Greek Heracles. But if you think back to our discussion of world ages, the first age is associated with Saturn and Kronos. That's the first revolution. And that's the golden age, and it's before the fall. That golden age ends when Zeus or Jupiter overthrows Kronos or Saturn. Hercules is the son of Zeus. That's no accident. And a mortal woman who is supposed to be the wisest and most beautiful woman. So the labors of Hercules are often associated with two significant things. First, the strength to overcome your vices, which one thinks one might do as one is working one's way back up the middle pillar of the tree, as well as journeying through the constellations of the zodiac. In fact, after his labors, Hercules, according to myth, becomes a constellation. The constellations and the zodiac are above the planets. They're associated, remember, with Hokmah, and then the planets are below. The constellations are, in the ancient Greek world, the fixed stars, and the planets are the moving stars. So now that we understand all that, we might think, oh, well, let's just read this astrologically. Dee is a famous astrologer. He picked the coronation date of Queen Elizabeth I, and we know that astrologers consider the sun exalted in the sign of Aries, which is ruled by Mars. The sun has the strongest essential dignity in the sign it rules, which is Leo, but is also dignified in Aries. The new light that comes in is then the moon, which is exalted in Taurus, and the moon has the strongest essential dignity in the sign it rules, which is Cancer, but it's also considered dignified in Taurus. So Dee is assuming you know all of these things about astronomy / astrology. And this relates perfectly back to his idea of the ternary and quaternary. You have 12 signs in the zodiac, right? There's a ternary of signs, or 3 signs that are related to the 4 elements. That is 3 fire signs, 3 earth signs, 3 water signs, 3 air signs. And then you have a quaternary, or 4 signs that are related to the 3 qualities, like the sign is either cardinal, fixed, or mutable. So for example, Taurus is fixed earth and Aries is cardinal fire. Okay. He doesn't take you through the whole rest of the zodiac, though, because he's going to do something that seems like perhaps an odd turn here. But we'll finish just this first sentence, labors of the sun and moon. Remember, the work of the sun is the creation of gold in physical alchemy. The work of the moon is the creation of silver. You can also associate this back to the emerald tablet, the father, son, and the moon its mother, and they create the one. But if we take this Kabbalistically, then you have, of course, the sun is Tifereth, the moon is Yesod. And you realize that D is interior astronomy. What he was talking about in Theorem 13, the interior astronomy, is the middle pillar of the tree of life. At least that's one Kabbalistic meaning, and there's another one. The other one is that it's the same in Hermetic Kabbalah today as it would have been then. It's the idea that the tree itself is divided into 4 worlds, and also that within each of those worlds, you get a miniature version of the tree. So Malkuth, where we are on Earth, is associated with the world of Asaya, and within Malkuth, there would be each of those. So Malkuth of Malkuth would be the lowest point. But if you're at Tifereth of Malkuth, you're still in Malkuth on the great tree, but you've started slowly moving up. In fact, there's even the thought that among Christian Kabbalists that come after D, that really all you are doing is working yourself up through Malkuth. Study Kabbalah on your own and make your own call. But it's a fascinatingly intricate system that D is just referring to a general framework of. But if you understand that general framework, you will understand a significant part of the hieroglyphic monad. Let's keep going here, though. We talked about the labors of the sun and moon, and we've talked about the tree of life. You know what planets now are associated with what Sephiroth, and that Chokmah is associated with the zodiac. Kether, by the way, is the prima mobile. That is the idea of there being a 10th sphere high above even the constellations. And we've talked about in earlier theorems about how that is formed. You get the flash through Doth, then things polarize, then you have the lightning flash. So the work of the sun as creation of gold, and the work of the moon as the creation of silver, is basically just a metaphor. If we take D's interior astronomy as the middle pillar of the tree and think of Chokmah as referring to the entire zodiac, then remember the numbers that you have. You have 10 Sephiroth, right? Look up at the theorem that we're in. D has had fun with the letter X since Theorem 8, when he talked about how it was 3 times 7, how significant it was that it was the 21st letter, and you get it associated with Kai, you get it associated with Tifereth, Jesus, a sacrifice god. You even get it associated with 2 kind of kissing cones if you flip the X into 3D, and he's going to come back to that in just a couple more theorems. So you can associate the 10 to the whole tree and a variety of geometrical shapes. What about 5? Well, it's half of 10, but you can also associate that with the 5th Sephira and Mars, Hercules, Aries, and so on. I want to mention this whirling through Aries for those of you who are interested in ceremonial magic, particularly the later work that D does with Edward Kelly in Scrying the Spirit Vision. Whirling isn't just a decorative verb choice. The whirling ones are the ophanim, and in the Ezekiel and the so-called chariot mysteries, you get them the references to the ophanim. The significance of the ophanim with Enochian, or what my friend Vincent decided to call it ophanic because of the ophanim, is something that he is D clearly thinking about in writing the monad, because the whirling ones are going to be the ophanim. Just take that and file it, and if you're studying Enochian magic sometime, come back to it. Now, as you are doing this work, You're doing it for Malkuth, a spiritual alchemy. The idea is you are perfecting qualities in yourself, overcoming vices like Hercules in his labors, or in the world around you. So let's keep going through here and see what this turns into. Well, I've again put in boldface the words I want to talk about. So exalted, the splendor of the sun is exalted. Could that mean something else? Well, of course, I don't think D ever means just one thing. He layers them on top of each other. So what else could he mean by exalted? Well, we could be back to the emerald tablet and the one, or the monad, that has the sun as its father and the moon as its mother. We're also back to the first golden age. So we also, when we get down here to high priest, we'll have something else. So let me read down to, this is very well known, in fact, to be the exaltation of the moon, revealed among astronomical teachings all the way from the first age of humanity. But only those of whom it has come to pass are indeed high priests of the mysteries. That word in ancient Greek, just for those of you who are in Kabbalistically based initiatory societies, that's where you get the word Hierophant from. That's literally the word in the Eleusinian mysteries, for example. So those that are high priests of the mysteries comprehend this particular mystery, and so for similar reasoning, they have said Taurus is in the house of Venus, indisputably the house of virtuous and prolific conjugal love. If you think I've just mistranslated that, consider that sexuality was like, D didn't live through the Victorian era. 3 decades after D is writing this, you know, you have the plays of Shakespeare that have sexual jokes in almost every act of every play. So there isn't a prohibition in talking about sex or sexuality. And this is even more apparent in the Latin, where he just seems to be going to town here. So the house of Venus, because of the case of Latin it's in, that's Veneris. So even if you do the most simple translation and translate it as Venus meaning the sign or planet, you're going to have puns all over the place. The simplest one is Veneris, along with the beauty and grace, is an inflected form of different verbs. Side note about pronunciation. If you have studied classical Latin, I know they would say Veneris. Medieval Latin would say Veneris, and I am saying it this way partly because of the influence of Spanish, frankly. But so Veneris, Veneris, take your choice. It can be an inflected form of the verb venio, just like you venir in Spanish, to come, venor, to hunt or chase. He's punning on veneror, worthy of respect and veneration, and on mons veneris, or the mound of Venus, the pubic area of a woman. And there's no question he's doing that. I mean, if you want to censor his language and say, oh, he didn't know that, there's no way you can do that. That's what he means. Especially given the puns between mons and monad, you can just be certain that meaning is among those he's intending. So what does that mean? It means wisdom attained through sacred sexual union. It's the union of the sun and the moon referred to throughout is on one level a sacred sexual union, a hieros gamos. He's done that since the letter to Maximillian, when he was talking about his gamos Gaian, or earth of marriage, gamos meaning marriage. So here he has hieros with his high priest of the mysteries, and then he is having all of these puns. And he's talking about his seals as earth of marriage being a kind of sexual union between celestial energies and the earth seal that is there. By the time we get to the end of this theorem, he will be seeing sexual union in grammatical cases, and you can decide yourself whether he's having fun or if he's seeing this as a reflection of simply how the world was created. So of course it's in grammatical cases. In alchemy, physical or otherwise, the union of the sun and the moon is often symbolized as a king and queen. You probably know that, but just in case you don't, they're also referred to gold and silver, and they create a child, and that child is the philosopher's stone. You can try to apply that to the great tree on your own. Hint, look at Eric Anpin and Zaire Anpin. Also, you're going to get D telling you by the end of this what the philosopher's stone is. And It's no secret. It's page 73 in our translation, so you can look ahead to that if you want. Okay, now we're going to get to this quote at the end. As the great Ostanes concealed in his most secret and recondite mysteries, nature rejoices in nature. This is one of the most famous quotes from the alchemy of the ancient world, except we don't have the ancient texts anymore, we have translation. So let me explain. And here you have on the screen a wonderful attempt to piece this all back together by Matteo Martelli, his 4 books of the Pseudo-Democritus, which is where you will find Ostanes. So remember back in the letter to Maximillian, D says, for example, we will descend from our hieroglyphic demonstrations into certain mysteries of Hermes, Ostanes, Pythagoras, Democritus, and Anaxagoras, though not so as to beg from them faith in our own tenets. In other words, he'll show this on his own, but it just happens to match them. And I said, when we got to a relevant point in the theorems, I'd say who they are. Well, it's a relevant point to talk about Ostanes and Democritus now. So Ostanes was a pen name that was, people assume it's a pen name anyway, used by several anonymous authors of Greek and Latin alchemical works. No one has found the real Ostanes. Of course, no surviving work of Democritus exists either. It's just so many people refer to both of them. The most famous probably is Zosimos of Panopolis, who is very associated with alchemical esotericism, and Synesius. These 2 people, among many others, consider the Persian Ostanes to be Democritus's teacher. You can read about that in Martelli's work if you want. No one has found an equivalent name to this in Farsi, the language of the ancient Persians and modern Iranians. So that's why there's an assumption that this is a pen name, but who knows? It could have existed. D writes what we have translated as nature rejoices in nature in ancient Greek, just to emphasize this famous quote. It's usually translated as either nature rejoices in nature or nature delights in nature, but nature is not just like the countryside. Nature is a very complex idea in the Renaissance, in the Middle Ages. It means everything from an originating power to, sometimes it gets in Christian Kabbalah associated with Yesod. It's everything that makes up a thing. Yes, I know that's vague, but that is the best I can simply explain what is meant by nature in this sense. So let's look at this a little bit more. An expanded version of the saying, nature rejoices in nature, nature rules over nature, and nature is the triumph of nature. Sometimes you also get the idea that only nature can beget nature, and so a lion can only beget a lion, and that kind of thing. That is, the essence of a thing is in what can beget that thing. So you see how this will be associated with Kabbalah. If you are working your way back up to the tree, or if humanity is, then humanity is made of that one thing they are working their way back up, which to D is light, divine light, as embodied by the Christos, and you are re-anointing yourself as you work back up the tree. Why doesn't he just come out and say that? Well, I guess he didn't want to, but also it'd be heretical to say that. You find, if you study the Renaissance and Renaissance rulers, that there is an educated class that seems quite aware and quite comfortable with many things that they consider to be heresy among people who are not educated or who are not of the upper class. Anyway, editorial comment aside, let's get back to nature rejoices in nature. You find this in the story of the initiation of Democritus himself into the Egyptian mysteries. And by the way, I know I stumble every time I say Democritus or Democritus. I read words like hundreds of times more than I pronounce them. So I apologize for that. Anyway, he was supposed to be initiated into the Egyptian mysteries. Now, I've talked about D's hieroglyph. By hieroglyph, he means a compressed symbol, not an Egyptian hieroglyph. But yet, he probably is aware of this whole mythology And by mythology, I mean something some people believe to be true. I'm not saying it's true or false, but this whole mythology surrounding the Egyptian mysteries. There are all kinds of tales of wise men from the East. Oh, let's see. One of them would be the three wise men in the Bible, but there are many, many others. So here is one of them. Ostanes initiates this great ancient Greek philosopher. There's a similar speech in the Turba Philosophorum, which is the assembly of the philosophers. That's one of the oldest European alchemy texts. It's from about the 9th century CE. I'd really encourage you to take a look at it if you've never seen it before, and I'll give you a link on how to do that in a minute. But this text itself is fascinating. It's a Latin translation of an Arabic translation of Greek alchemical texts. Now, today you can compare English translations, either of the Latin or the Arabic, but you can't compare them back to the ancient Greek because not all of those texts have survived. In fact, doing that is what Martelli was trying to do in that book I just showed you, and he does as well as you can do when many of the texts are missing. So if it's missing, then you're like, well, did it ever exist? Was it made up, or is it just missing? One of the first people to write about this in English, Plessner, called the Turba Philosophorum a remarkable attempt to put Greek alchemy into the Arabic language and to adapt it to Islamic science. So what you have are terms that don't seem interchangeable, but in fact are the way they're used in these alchemical texts. So you have one person saying God, another person saying world of being, another writing Allah, and another saying Christ or the Christos, and adapting the same ideas. If you'd like to read an English translation of the Turba Philosophorum, there's one on Adam McLean's wonderful alchemy site. I'd just go there and word search through it for nature and see for yourself, what does nature mean in the Turba Philosophorum in this famous quote, nature rejoices in nature. Oops, I have that quote twice, sorry. This work, the Turba Philosophorum, seems to be the source of the enigmatic Isis the prophetess to her son Horus letter, which becomes attached to Zosimus of Panopolis. The explicitly sexual nature of that fragment of the Codex Marcianus appears to have really influenced Dee a lot, and I'll probably do another separate video on it, but not until I get finished with this theorem. So we're going to continue with this theorem in the next video, but for now, just remember, nature rejoices in nature. Okay, bye-bye. Have a good day.